As promised, I'm now going to give you my scorecard for the Canelo Golovkin rematch. But before I do, it's very important to establish how I watched this fight and what my criteria was for scoring it. Now, first of all, how I watched it. I watched this fight the second time around in 720p HD at 30 frames per second. Now, why is this significant? Well, because the higher the resolution that you watch a fight in and the higher the frame rate, the easier it is to see which punches land and which punches don't land when you're watching the fight in real time or at normal play speed rather than slow motion, okay? So let's say you watch the fight at 1080p in 60 frames per second at a high bit rate, like 100 megabytes per second. It's going to be much easier to tell which shots land and don't land if you're watching a video of that quality than it would be if you're watching a video that was, let's say, 480p, 24 frames per second, etc. So the video that I watched was 720p, 30 frames per second. So it was decent, but not that great, not ideal. And so therefore, I watched a lot of the rounds in slow motion. I slowed it right down to super slow motion to be able to look close and detect what shots were actually hitting gloves and what shots were landing on the target area. Because to be clear, people, punches that hit gloves, that land on gloves, are not scoring blows. You can disregard punches that are hitting gloves. Okay, so that's how I watched the fight. Now, what my criteria is for scoring, you just heard part of it there. You have to be landing clean, effective punches. That's my criteria, okay? Now, what constitutes clean and effective? Clean, that's really self-explanatory, isn't it? Are you landing on the target area? So not hitting the guy on the gloves, not hitting the guy on the arms. Are you landing either on the body or in the face? Those are the target areas in professional boxing. And as far as being effective, are you landing with sufficient force? Because I'll give you an example. This is how professional boxing judges will look at it. If one guy is landing, let's say, 20 punches in a particular round, and the other guy's only landing 15, if the guy who's landing the 15 is connecting with more power, the judges will often score it to the guy who's landing the 15 if his shots are more damaging. I mean, it could be a case where the guy who has landed 20 punches in that round has landed 15 jabs and 5 power shots. But a guy who only landed 15 punches, he landed 10 power shots and only 5 jabs. Do you understand? So a lot of the time the judges are going to go with the guy who landed the more powerful, damaging punches rather than the one who landed more punches. Okay, so the guy who's landing 10 power shots and 5 jabs is landing more clean, effective shots than the one who's landing 5 power shots and 15 jabs. Do you understand? Especially if those jabs are not particularly hard jabs. I've seen some people say that Golovkin deserved to win this fight because he was using his jab a lot. And they've said Larry Holmes made a whole career out of using his jab. Well, Larry Holmes, people, had a punishing jab. If you were taking a significant amount of clean jabs off Larry Holmes, your face would look like pulp by the end of the fight. Canelo Alvarez's face did not look like pulp at the end of this fight. He did not, to me, look like a man who had been hit with hundreds of jabs in the face, hundreds of clean, hard jabs. He didn't look like that. Which is why I made a conscious choice to go and watch several of the rounds of this fight in slow motion. And if you want to see me analyze this fight in slow motion, or a couple of rounds of this fight in slow motion, and demonstrate exactly what jabs are landing and what jabs are not landing, etc., go and watch the video that I posted yesterday in my Facebook boxing group, Hatman Boxing, and you will see the fight in super slow motion, and have a look at what shots are landing and what shots are not landing. Okay, so I was scoring for who's landing the most clean, effective punches. Now, let me give you my scorecard now, right? And then I'm going to talk about the politics involved in boxing and the politics potentially involved in the scoring of this fight. Now, before I do that though, I do have to say, judges and CompuBox people sitting at ringside do not have the benefit of watching the fight in slow motion. They do not have the benefit when they're scoring the fight live of rewinding certain rounds, watching it in slow motion, and then saying, okay, this jab actually didn't land, right? So judges will often be giving fighters the benefit of the doubt. Okay, I'm not sure if that landed, but I think it did. I'm not sure if that didn't land. Let me say it didn't. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're often giving fighters the benefit of the doubt. And when it comes to Canelo, we know that he gets the rub of the green a lot. But another thing I have to tell you is that this fight, particularly when you go and watch it in slow motion, many of the rounds, this fight has got a hell of a lot, and I mean a hell of a lot, of close rounds, of rounds which could have gone either way. Particularly when you watch the fight in slow-mo, there are so many rounds that could go either way, because there's very little to split them. And so therefore, having combed through this fight with a fine-tooth comb, I can tell you with a surety that there is no definitive scorecard for this fight. If you had Golovkin winning the fight, no problem. If you had Canelo winning the fight, no problem. If you had the fight a draw, no problem. I've disagreed with Harold Lederman numerous times in the past, but for this fight right here, Harold Lederman himself, midway through the fight, said, this fight is so difficult to score. There are so many close rounds. I 100% agree with that. There are so many close rounds in this fight that you could come up with all kind of different scorecards. But let me just give you my scorecard, okay? And if you disagree with some of the rounds, that's okay. But understand that we're talking about tiny, tiny margins of difference between who's landing the more clean, effective punches in each round, okay? With that being said, this is how I scored the fight. Round 1, Canelo. Now, when I initially was watching this fight live, I actually scored round 1 a draw, 10-10. Okay, I stopped scoring the fight live midway through because my stream got choppy. But initially, when I first watched the fight, I scored the first round even. But watching it second time around, particularly watching the first round in slow-mo, to me that was actually a Canelo round. He definitely landed the cleaner jabs and more power shots in the first round. And he definitely landed at a far higher connect percentage throughout most of the rounds than Golovkin did. That doesn't mean he landed more punches overall. He certainly didn't throw as many as Golovkin. But in terms of what the percentage of his shots that were landed compared to the shots of his that were missing or blocked, he had a far better ratio than Golovkin. Golovkin's shots were not accurate. He was missing a lot. He was hitting gloves a lot overall. Do you understand? Anyway, Canelo 10-9, the first round. Second round, I also gave it to Canelo. Third round, I gave to Golovkin. Fourth round, I gave to Canelo. Fifth round, I gave to Golovkin. Sixth round, I gave to Canelo. Seventh round, I gave to Golovkin. Eighth round, I gave to Canelo. Ninth round, Canelo. 10th round, Golovkin. 11th round, Canelo. 12th round, Golovkin. So my final scorecard was 115 to 114 for Canelo Alvarez. So I had the fight to Canelo by 1 point. Now, Canelo's own trainer, Abel Sanchez, said that this was a 1 point fight. Where there was 1 point in it, the fight could have gone either way. That's Golovkin's own trainer, sorry, I wouldn't say Canelo. Golovkin's own trainer Abel Sanchez was saying this. I concur with that, having watched the fight through and scored it this time, watching several of the rounds in slow motion. It was razor close. Anybody telling you that there is a definitive way to score this fight, they haven't watched it in slow motion. They haven't watched it closely enough. They haven't looked at Golovkin's jab particularly and seen how inaccurate it is in this fight. Once again, I can't emphasize this enough. Golovkin's throwing a lot of shots, so when you're watching in real speed, particularly if you're not watching at 60 frames in 4K or whatever the case may be, when you're watching a fight in real speed, there's an optical illusion at play where it looks like Golovkin's landing loads of jabs and, oh my god, these are scoring punches and he's way ahead in the round. Watch back in slow motion. Most of Golovkin's jabs, I'm talking about the vast majority of Golovkin's jabs in many of the rounds, are hitting Canelo's gloves. They're not landing on Canelo's face. When Canelo throws his jabs, he is landing at a far higher connect percentage and he's also landing more solidly. A lot of Golovkin's jabs, even the ones that do land, are landing quite weak. There's not that much on them. On the back foot, Golovkin loses a lot of power like most fighters do. Yeah, there are very few fighters who can throw with tremendous power when they're moving backwards. David Haye in his prime used to be one of them, okay? But most fighters can't. Golovkin included, it seems. His jab in the Danny Jacobs fight was a ramrod jab. It was powerful. It busted Danny Jacobs' eyes up. Look at Danny Jacobs' eyes in that fight. Even though I thought that was a fight that, Jacobs could have won certainly on my scorecard and some people's scorecards, many people's scorecards, they had Jacobs winning. But that's a separate issue. The point I'm making is Jacobs' eyes were busted up from Golovkin's jab. Were Canelo's eyes busted up like that? No. Why? Because most of Golovkin's jabs were not landing. They were hitting Canelo's gloves. And the ones that did land were not landing with any particular force. This is what is essential for anyone who thinks this was a robbery, for anyone who thinks this was clearly a Golovkin win. You need to go and watch the fight in slow motion and have a look at Golovkin's jab. You'll see most of them jabs ain't landing. Okay, now he did still land jabs and he did still land power shots. And there were many rounds, several rounds, where Canelo really didn't do much by way of landing or throwing. His punch output was far lower than Golovkin's. So you're trying to concentrate and look at the few Golovkin punches which do actually land clean and weigh that against the few times Canelo actually throws any punches and lands. So it's difficult watching the fight, even in slow-mo, to split them in a lot of the rounds. But again, in slow-mo, it's certainly easier to see what lands and what don't land. What's hitting the gloves and what's hitting the face. Yeah? And another point to make, which I've already mentioned, is that body punching is scored in professional boxing. Let's be clear about this. Canelo was the one doing most of the body punching. Those are scoring blows. Body punches are not scored as significant, they're not counted as significant as head punches when it comes to scoring, okay? But they are still scored. That's my understanding of it anyway. So let's say one guy lands 10 punches in a round and they're all headshots. The other guy lands 10 punches in a round, they're all body shots. My understanding of it is the guy who's landed the headshots should win the round if he's landed with sufficient force, because headshots overrule body shots in a situation like that. Okay, but if you've got a guy landing 15 body shots in a round and the other guy lands 10 headshots, who do you give the round to? At some point, the extra body shots overrule the headshots, right? So these are the kind of things you have to come to conclusions about yourself. And again, this is why this fight was not easy to score. I've seen people out here saying, this is the definitive scorecard. My scorecard is right and everyone else's scorecard is rubbish. You have to have scored it like this. And if you haven't scored it like this, you don't know anything about boxing. Nonsense. Calm down. Go take a chill pill. Watch the fight in slow-mo. If you have the time. It's very time consuming to watch the fight in slow-mo, obviously. But if you do, you'll see that you can disregard the majority of Golovkin's jabs in many of the rounds because they're not landing. Alright? Now, here's where we come on to the political side of things. Judges, as I mentioned earlier, and CompuBox people, but let's stick to judges for now. Judges do not have the benefit of watching the fight in slow-mo. So, how could they give Canelo the benefit of the doubt in so many rounds? How could they know that Golovkin's jab wasn't landing that accurately and that most of them were being blocked on the gloves? Well, at ringside, when they've got a good angle and the action is close to them, they can tell better than anybody. They can tell better than us watching on TV who's landing what. But when the fighters are on the other side of the ring, next to one of the other judges, they might not be able to see. You know, that first judge might not be able to see clearly what's landing and what's not landing. So it's a difficult situation. But one thing we do know is that Canelo Alvarez has got a long history of getting the benefit of the doubt from judges. You see, he's had scorecards like in the Mayweather fight, which were outrageous. One of the judges had it a draw. That was outrageous for that fight. He had scorecards, for example, in the Miguel Cotto fight, which I thought were way too wide. He's had scorecards like in the Austin Trout fight, in the Erislandy Lara fight, which gave him the benefit of the doubt, let's just say. So in a close fight, Canelo always seems to get the decision. And is that political? I can't imagine that it's anything else. I can't imagine that it's anything other than judges being influenced in some way or other by the Canelo machine. So he gets favorable treatment from officials unquestionably. And if you're looking at this particular fight, well, you're going to say this is yet another example of Canelo getting favoritism from the officials in a competitive fight. When is the other guy going to get the rub of the green? When is the other guy going to get the benefit of the doubt in a Canelo fight? Why is it always Canelo getting the benefit of the doubt? If you look at the fight in that context, then I can understand why you would say there was foul play going on in the scoring of this fight. Yeah, I can understand in that context. But if you look at this fight as a standalone fight, if you forget about the history, if you imagine that you didn't know either of these fighters and you were just watching them fight on an undercard somewhere, you wouldn't be upset by the way that fight was scored. If you watched it closely, you wouldn't be upset because it was close enough that it could have gone to either guy. That's the reality of it. And in that sense, this fight is not a robbery. But you can definitely say that it is yet another example of Canelo getting the benefit of the doubt from judges in a close fight. And in that sense, you can say there's corruption going on here. Because how can it be, or potentially anyway, corruption, because how can it be that every single time this guy's in a close fight, he gets the decision? Why does he never go to the other guy? And even when he wasn't in a close fight against Mayweather, he got a draw on one of the cards. Crazy. Right? Even in the first Golovkin fight, that was a draw too. He got the benefit of the doubt first time against Golovkin by getting a draw rather than a loss. And the second time, he gets the benefit of the doubt as well. These are close fights, which could go either way, but they're always going Canelo's way. You see? So again, sorry to labor the point, but in that context, I can understand why people are aggrieved. But if you watch it as a standalone fight, forget about the backstory, forget about the history, you can't be angry with that result. You can't be angry with that decision if you're watching it as a standalone fight. Okay? So, anyway, that's that. That's my scorecard for Canelo Golovkin. And it's one of them kind of fights where I could watch this fight 10 times and come up with 5 different scorecards. Because there are so many close rounds. Anybody trying to say in the comments of this video that there are not that many close rounds, you haven't watched the fight closely enough. Go and watch the fight in slow-mo. Look at the shots that are not landing that you thought were landing. They're hitting gloves, particularly Canelo's gloves. Not punches landing. Alright? So, yeah. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's happening, I'm out.